there is a healthy way
Hmm.
to have relationships with your parents and your in-laws.
Yeah.
And we've been a recipient of that, that we've had that blessing. So, yeah. And we've also had a struggle, a road of struggle. So, and we are also now parents who are possibly influencing our children's lives, in a
Yeah.
positive way. So this is a very real topic for us.
You're listening to the Favorite Marriage Podcast, a place where you and your spouse can experience God's favor on your forever. Join us as we explore relevant topics and provide practical tools for your marriage toolbox. Here's this week's episode of The Favorite Marriage. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Favorite Marriage Podcast. We are your hosts, Monty and Jeannine Mora. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about navigating parental influence. And we believe that this is one of the roads that many couples have to navigate
Right.
down is how they're going to allow parental influence in their own marriage relationship. So whether they're
hmm
starting out very new in their marriage or maybe they've been married for many years, sometimes this does have an impact in the marriage life of the
Right.
couple.
For sure. And we heard about that just recently in our last marriage class. It was really interesting to hear the different influences that parents are still having in some couples that are, older in age,
Hmm.
and they're still feeling that effect. And then some of our younger couples that are in the class, we realized, wow, this is a topic that would probably be very important to cover, and just seeing the struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, the struggle's still real in some people's lives, and you just got to come to a place where, well, maybe you never even learned, and I guess that's the urgency of that we felt about having
Mm,
um, this topic,
sure. Yeah.
because there's couples still having that influence in a bad way, is kind of what we
For sure.
heard.
Yeah.
So there is a healthy way
Hmm.
to have relationships with your parents and your in-laws.
Yeah.
And we've been a recipient of that, that we've had that blessing. So, yeah. And we've also had a struggle, a road of struggle. So, and we are also now parents who are possibly influencing our children's lives, in a
Yeah.
positive way. So this is a very real topic for us.
Yeah. And it's a biblical topic. You go back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, scripture does record that a man will leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So it
Mhm.
is there's some biblical parameters
Yes.
to that idea. And it really takes a lot of hard work for the married couple to learn the process of really what it means to leave home, leave mom and dad, and cleave now to their spouse and develop like a new sense of
hmm
allegiance. Because we think about when we're home, when we're living at home, all those years our parents are shaping us and molding us, and there comes a point now where we're like, "Mom and dad, it's time to leave." You know
hmm
what I mean? So what does that mean to leave? It means that we trade allegiances now. We're not our first allegiance, first priority is not them anymore.
Right.
Whereas now our first allegiance, our first priority is our spouse now.
Right.
And that's the cleaving part that needs to take place.
And we've also seen, right, Monty, where there's couples who did not have that in both sides of their families, where there were either there was death that the spouse experienced, and they didn't have that parental exampleship in their home, or they were raised by siblings or aunts or uncles. We've seen that.
Sure.
And we've also seen where a spouse has had a very negative influence, where they didn't want anything to do with their parents, and so when they come together,
Hmm.
they really don't understand, like, the struggle that's happening when that spouse, whoever it is, it could be the husband or the wife,
Yeah.
when they leave their family, like, why is it so hard for you just to disconnect?
Hmm.
Because they've never been connected to a parent, a
Hmm.
mom or a
Sure.
dad. So there's also that type of influence where there's a non-existent parental guidance in their
Mhm.
life. So yeah, it can It can be because the parents were there their whole life, or there were no parents there
Mm.
with them growing up. So
And I
influence
think
happens in different
both
ways.
of those scenarios have their own challenges. Obviously, I think
Absolutely.
not having that parental influence, like even like looking back at my own life, growing up, single mom raising six of us,
Mm-hmm.
myself being the youngest and dad not being there. Parents divorced when I was 6 months of age.
Mm.
And so I brought those influences into our marriage relationship.
Right.
But like for you, you grew up in a home, mom and dad, they're still married today, and you were shaped by their influences. And so yeah, I mean, it created challenges on
Right.
both
Well,
sides.
let's start there. I mean, as an example, when we were married, I mean, our family, and this is something I value very much in our family, we gathered for everything, right? So,
Yeah,
and this is when
everything.
we were younger. Now that we're all growing up and having our own families, and there's grandkids and great grandkids, and we don't get together as much. But you were just like, "What are we getting together for now?"
Yeah.
And it really was hard for me to try to communicate to you how important this was, and um, having that struggle
Mhm.
was real for us because you didn't have that growing up. It
No.
was just you and your siblings
Yeah. It was our little
most of the
tribe.
time. Yeah,
Yeah. And, like, we didn't do any big family gatherings like your family does, and so
extended.
extended. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it was just us getting together, and sometimes even, like, we were even talking about, like, even, like, birthday parties, birthday celebrations, um, they weren't a big deal for us. I mean, we'd get a happy birthday, maybe a cake, maybe a little special dinner, but we were just in a place financially where big celebrations just did not happen. Whereas when we got married in your family, it's like when our kids had birthdays, I mean, it
everybody
was
was
everybody.
invited.
We invited like, all of the entire city, to our
Oh, it's not that
yeah,
much.
I'm being
it,
facetious. Yeah, yeah.
it felt like it
It
was
felt like
though.
it, yeah.
I mean, because we have a big family.
But thinking about that, I so value that
Hmm.
because it was something I never had. And so it created like a need in me, like, man, this is so important. This is how kinda like how families are to do things, you know what I mean? So, it was a really cool value that you brought into our marriage, into our family. Of course, you learned that from your parental influence.
Right. And I just want to be clear, like when we talk about family, we're talking like extended family, like aunts, uncles, cousins, and because your family's awesome about getting together and is celebrating each other.
Yeah.
But
Now.
like your circle was so much smaller,
Yeah.
and our mine was bigger, and so you had to learn to open your heart
Mhm.
to a bigger circle.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
Yeah.
that was I mean, I don't think it was difficult. I mean, it took a couple parties and
Mhm.
then
Yeah.
you realize a couple Christmases maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thinking about the going back to the influences like the Bible shows us, right? I
Sure.
think you were sharing a story about Moses and Jethro.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so parental influences being in a positive way.
Hmm.
So, we know in, the book of Exodus chapter 18, Moses had a father-in-law. His
Hmm.
name was Jethro, which was I think was a kind of a cool name. But,
Yeah.
"Hey, Jethro." Um, and Jethro came to visit Moses and Jethro's daughter, and he saw that Moses one day was judging all the people. All these needs of the people were coming to Moses, bringing them to Moses, and
Wait a minute. Let
Jethro
me back
saw
up. Jethro was visiting
Moses
Moses
and
and
his
Zipporah.
daughter. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just wanted to clarify that.
yeah. And
So wait, like, so the father-in-law came to visit them.
yes,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
How nice.
beautiful. Father-in-law, come and give us a visit, please.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I just had to throw that out there.
he doesn't like to travel all the way up here. So
Okay.
we regressed or digressed. So let's get back to the story. So Jethro was visiting Moses and his daughter, and he saw Moses doing his work as a judge. And so people were bringing all of these problems for Moses to solve. And Jethro was watching Moses judging the nation from
Mhm.
morning all the way to evening. And he kind of, after it's all over, he's observing and he says to Jethro, or he says to Moses, "What you're doing is not good. I want to give you some advice." He goes, "If you keep doing this at this pace, you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to wear yourself out and you're going to wear the people out." Then
Mhm.
the advice was, he goes, "I want you to choose judges, choose other capable men that can judge the smaller cases,
Mhm.
you know, and then the larger cases that they can't really take on or tackle, they bring those to you." So he actually gave him this wise advice of how to judge people and minister to people, and he's spreading out the wealth to other capable men.
Yeah.
So that was some wisdom that the
That's
father-in-law gave to his son.
so good. I think that was so important to just highlight, because what we really want to do with this episode is really show you, or give you examples and stories of how a parent can have a positive influence in your life and in your marriage, because I think it's pretty obvious how parents can be negative, right? I
Mhm.
mean, they're overbearing, over controlling, come when they're uninvited. There's so
Sure.
many things. I think those are really easy to recognize. Um, well, maybe not, because there's some people that haven't recognized, like we were talking about our class. Like, there's still those negative influences, but we kind of want to just concentrate on how important giving those boundaries and those open doors
Mhm.
to your parents, because they are still your parents. and
Yeah.
and the Bible does talk about giving honor
Yeah.
to your parents. And when you're married, you have two sets, right? You have
Sure.
your in-laws, are your there's still that opportunity to still learn from them.
Mhm.
And I think about also Naomi and Ruth,
Mhm.
and
Good
how
story.
Ruth honored her mother-in-law
Mhm.
because of how their relationship, right, was so
Mhm.
valuable
Mhm.
to her. And even when she told her, go back home to your family, and maybe you can remarry
Mhm.
and still have a future, the bond that they have, I really wish that story went in more depth
Mhm.
of their relationship and why it was so strong.
Mhm.
But all it does is tell us about the love that Ruth had for Naomi. So that had to have been some really good influence on that young lady, for
Yeah.
her to say, "No, I'm going wherever you go.
Mhm.
Your God is
Mhm.
my God." And
Mhm.
so to think about how, and that's like my prayer. I pray that I can be a Naomi to my daughter-in-laws and my daughter. And so it's a very important place to be
Sure.
in your children's lives, is that positive influence.
Mhm. And we have to look for them too,
Mhm.
because like you said, it's so easy to focus on the negative stuff.
Mhm.
But I think if a couple really looks hard and fast at their parents and in-laws, I bet that they can find at least one thing, positive thing that they can take from their mom and dad. You know what I
Yeah, for
mean?
sure.
And or their in-laws. Those two examples in the Bible are just indicative of how powerful the in-law influence can be for
Mhm.
a marriage
Yeah.
relationship. And I know we're talking about that our own in-laws, and I don't know if now would be a good time you want to kind of talk about highlight some of those positive
Yeah. It was a good
influences.
conversation. Let's share.
Yeah. So I'll go first.
Okay.
Okay. So um, I call my in-laws mom Paula. Her name is Paula, and my father-in-law, I call him Pops.
Mhm.
And so I'll say Mom, Paula, and Pops. And so if you're listening, I want you to hear me, okay? I love you as my in-laws. And I think the the important thing or the influence I've seen from my mother-in-law, Paula, is her godly influence. I
Mhm.
mean, ever since I've known you, known her, I've known her in church to be a woman of
Mhm.
God, and I
Yeah.
know she's a praying woman. So I've always valued her prayers for us, and
Yes.
and and she's a praying woman. And I know there have been moments in our marriage where we felt her prayers
Oh, yeah.
touching our life in a very powerful way. So I would just say that godly influence that you, Mom Paula, have had for me, thank you so very much. And it is still impacting our lives even today.
Mhm.
So thank you so much. And for my father-in-law, Pops, what I love about him is his love for family. He
Yeah.
fights for family unity. I mean, that is a
Family
high value
time.
system
Yeah.
for him is family time and just spending time with family. And it doesn't have to be a whole lot. It could be just going over, having a meal together, playing a board game. I mean, as I'm
Makes him
watching,
happy.
yeah, bringing some happy. And I just watch him. I watch you sometimes, Pops, and as you observe all of us getting together, and I just see that your
Mhm.
heart is smiling because you value family, and that's
Mhm.
something that I've learned from him, and that I've really have high esteem for is what I've learned from you from the context of
Yeah.
valuing family.
Oh.
So,
So I feel like my story is one that anybody can learn from. Most people come guarded
mhm,
into a marriage with from their in-laws, right? Because they don't know what to expect. There's that stigma of like, oh, I'm never gonna live up to be that woman or that man for their daughter or their son. And so you come a little guarded. And so a little story I think of is when I was pregnant and
mhm,
ready to deliver our first son, our firstborn Caleb. And I remember telling you I'm a very private person, very self just conscious. And I said, I only want you and my mom in the delivery room.
mhm,
End of story. And I remember you saying, well, my mom's gonna want to be in there. She's a nurse, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I love her and everything, but you could please respect that. And so we didn't have to worry about it. So I thought, because she was living in Albuquerque at the time. I feel like I've told this story before, but okay, let's just speed it up. So, long story short, I was in labor long enough for your sister and your mom to get to Pueblo and knock on the
yeah,
door. And at that point, I was like, oh, here we go. Okay, just at that point, I was in so much pain. I was like, just let him in. And it was an opportunity, an open door
mhm,
for me to let her in and just work her magic. I mean, she massaged me, she did everything. I remember her getting towels and putting them on my head. And I mean, she she was just so loving.
mhm,
And just the different side of her that I saw in
yeah.
that room. From that day on, it was like, "Oh, no, she's coming into all
All
of
the
my."
deliverance, yeah.
And not just because she served me so well,
Mhm,
but it did something for our relationship.
mhm,
And I just feel like if I would have never opened that door and just let her in, what how that could have affected.
mhm,
So I say all that to say to anybody out there who might feel guarded and you feel like you're protecting your heart from in-laws
mhm.
because you just don't know, or there's just that you don't know what, there's this unexpected, and you're just guarded.
Sure,
I don't
yeah,
know how to say
yeah.
other than just being guarded is take a step of faith. Open the door. You never know how just opening the door and opening your heart to your in-law could affect your relationship for the future.
Mhm. Yeah,
And it's something I look back at, and I just thank God that
yeah,
we have those memories with her.
yeah. Now our audience is probably like figuring out, why are you speaking of the in-law, mother-in-law in that way, not directly
Mhm.
like I did to your in-laws.
Oh, yeah.
So my mom and my dad are both deceased, and
Mhm.
so these are the memories that
Yeah.
you have of them when they were both alive, and I think that was a beautiful story with my mom, and I know she really cherished that, and she
Yeah.
just really loved being there for you.
And your dad's humor. He
Yeah.
always, I mean, and it's so influenced you in your life. So his humor is, I mean, I could always count on him making me laugh and smile.
Mhm. Beautiful stuff, beautiful memories just talking about these things.
Mhm.
Man, it's pretty cool, and so, of course, we're talking about a lot of the positive influences,
Yeah.
um, of our in-laws and our parents, and we wanted to do this to our for our audience simply because we want to, encourage you to look at those influences, positive influences that your parents and in-laws are having in your
Yeah.
relationship. Because, like we said earlier, it's so easy to see the negative, to point out the negative. And if you could just look a little bit deeper and see that, hey, there are some amazing things that my parents and my in-laws have taught me and how they influence our marriage today.
Right. And I think the important thing we also wanted to communicate because we understand, we had our struggles and our
Mhm.
parents weren't perfect and we weren't perfect either to our children. I'm sure we did a lot of things that they probably look back at and say, I'm never gonna do that.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah.
Um, but we want you to have grace.
Mm,
And that's the big word that we want to maybe
yeah.
start wrapping things up with is
Mhm.
grace. Because God has had grace on us
Mhm.
and we would not be in the place we are today with our relationships with our family if we didn't give each other grace
Mhm.
because we're not always going to do things right and you might be sitting on the other side of this camera and thinking or if you're hearing this you might be thinking there is no way you have no idea how damaging
Mm,
my parents were to me or to my siblings or to all of us, that
right.
in our family. We don't.
Mm-mm.
Only you know,
Mhm.
but God knows.
Yeah.
And God has given you a measure of grace
Yeah.
and you have to decide whether to give it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, we are talking about this idea of extending grace to your parents, and
Mhm.
I'm thinking back to my own dad.
Yeah.
Being raised single mom, dad and mom divorced when I was young. I never had a dad growing up, and it wasn't until I was an adult, married man with kids, where God brought my dad back into our lives,
Mhm.
and it was pretty neat because at the time I was pastoring a church down in another city in Pueblo. He started to attend to my church,
Mhm.
and there came a beautiful moment towards the latter part of my dad's life where I was able to lead my dad to the Lord. And there was just an amazing reconciliation between him and God, first and foremost. And there was an amazing reconciliation between my
Mhm.
dad and all of us, my 6 siblings, before
Right.
he passed away.
And his other children, his other daughters.
Yeah, Venus and Tessie, yeah.
Yes, there was also healing there, right? So now
Yeah.
there's this love and bond with all of you because you all extended grace to him.
Yeah,
All of you extended
all of us
grace.
did, yeah. It all began just with grace, I what is the acronym of grace that you like
Oh
to say?
Lord.
God's riches at Christ's
Well,
expense?
that's
Or
no,
do you know
that's
what I'm talking about?
yeah, well, that's something else, but I think the grace that you're thinking of is the one I use
Oh,
in my classroom.
erase with grace.
Erase with grace.
Yeah.
Give room to allow change every day.
Mhm. Okay. GRAC. Love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Grace. Whew. That's so good. Well, we want to encourage you as a married couple to honor your parents,
Mhm.
but at the same time, put your marriage first. Let me say that again. Honor your parents, but put your marriage first. Your marriage only works best in first place, of course,
Mhm.
after God.
Yeah.
And so, is there anything else, my beautiful wife, that you would like to share with our audience before we sign off today?
I mean, I just think recapping from the beginning, navigating parental influence,
Yeah,
and there are reasons for boundaries.
sure.
And I mean, we didn't go into all those details today. We didn't feel like that was the platform we wanted to go in and give you 3 points in the song about what that should look like. But we really wanted to open your eyes and your heart
Sure.
to how parental influence can be a positive factor in your family and in your marriage, and just extending that grace
Yeah. And there are plenty of books and resources out there to help married couples set up those boundaries, in their own life, their own marriage. And so,
Mhm.
maybe on another episode we can really tackle, like, in more detail what those boundaries would look like and how we implemented them in our own marriage,
Right.
growing up. And so, yeah, so there you have it, navigating parental influence. So, as we sign off today, we would like to dedicate this episode to a very special individual. His
Mhm.
name is Pastor Sonny Arguinzoni. We got word this past week that he went
Mm.
home to be with the Lord. And so we want to dedicate this episode to Pastor Sonny, the Arguinzoni family, and of course, the Victory Outreach International family
Mhm.
altogether. This is the family, this was a ministry that we were raised in. And Pastor Sonny Arguinzoni was a great influence in our lives. We always saw him as our spiritual grandfather in the faith.
Right. And what perfect episode to dedicate to him other than something that is talking about influence, because this
Hmm.
man has influenced millions across the globe, all over. Many
Mhm.
nations have planted thousands of churches worldwide.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, we have a very fond place for him in our heart. Arganzoni family, we are praying for you, and he will live on. His legacy will live on
Mhm.
in many, many people's lives.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. Well, as we wrap up this episode, Janine, as we call it good,
Hmm.
we'd like to thank you for tuning in to the Favorite Marriage Podcast. If you haven't had an opportunity to rate and review the podcast, we ask that you would do that. And if you enjoy what you're hearing, share it with the family member, share it with a friend. This helps us get this important message out to many marriages around the globe. And so, as always, we are praying that you would experience God's favor
On your forever.